Well, of course, when we get to Daisy, we will know that daylight does not necessarily mean that we do not encounter spooks. But first, I'd like to start by asking the obvious question that what drove each of you to write this book? Maybe we'll start with Daisy.
Okay, first I'd like to apologize because you probably didn't see me on the menu for this panel, but I missed my flight and my panel yesterday, so Malvika very generously dropped me into this one, and I thank you all for putting up with that, and our moderator for reading my book all night. So what inspired me? Well, when I first wrote the book, people said I didn't expect to see you writing speculative fiction. And I said, well, I didn't think it was speculative fiction. And they said, why? And I said, well, because I was brought up to read, to believe in ghosts, so I think of it as realism. So that's why my ghost doesn't follow the usual pathway of being scary and creepy and so on. And then what I was inspired by is that although I haven't personally seen ghosts, there are many of my family members who have been seen, such as my grandmother who appeared in riding habit, side saddle, and waved to some people that were trying to buy her house that she didn't want to buy it, so she just waved to them and they ran away, and she was obviously was successful. So yeah, that was my inspiration.
Aruna?
Well, frankly, if I have to be frank, I must say I wrote these ghost stories because I felt very lazy. You know, my earlier writing has always been in the realm of historical fiction and biofiction, and that demands a lot of research, a lot of field work, and I really got totally exhausted, particularly after the last one, The Mendicant Prince, when I actually had to visit Bangladesh and sort of go to the Rajbari and sort of get an idea of the topography of the place, etc. And after that, I decided I'll do something simple. And I thought, let me write a story. And then also I thought that let me just break out of this mold in which I have, trapped myself, this historical biofiction mold. And then I thought, let me write a ghost story. Now, actually, when I was a child, I used to make up a lot of stories, and I used to force my younger brothers and sisters to sit and listen to them. And when I grew up, when I was married and had children, I had a daughter of my own, and I would get all my, my nieces and nephews and the neighborhood children. In fact, one of them is sitting right here. Ringu. So, and we would all on winter evenings, we'd sort of cuddle under my quilt and I'd tell them all those stories. And I loved the way they reacted to those stories. They loved them and they were afraid and they wouldn't go to the bathroom without somebody accompanying them. So I thought, let me try my hand at, that forgotten genre. So, of course, it isn't that I wrote those stories because I had forgotten. I was just making them up as I went along. But I just wrote one story. I don't know from where the idea came. And I found that I quite enjoyed writing the story. And then I wrote another, and another, and another. Finally, I wrote 11 stories. But when I took it to my publishers, Penguin, they said, Arunadi, make it 13 stories. That'll be nice and eerie. So I wrote 2 more. And that is how, I came to write this book.
Thank you. Sanjoy.
To begin with, I think, Malvika, a big congratulations. This place is absolutely awesome. And I think at night we would have had encounters with many kinds of ghosts. But this is an awesome place. So congratulations for setting the festival here. It's my first time to their festival, and what they've achieved is amazing. In my case, it's really accidental. I'm not a writer, unlike them. I have no intentions of writing. It was in COVID that a number of publishers kept coming to me because either people were baking or they were writing books. So publishers came to me to say, can we do a 3-book deal or a 2-book deal? And I was like, no way, this is of no interest. I'm a reader. I love reading. I read 6 or 7 books at a time. And I turned to Himali Sodhi from a suitable agency, who's my agent, and I said, Himali, tell them I'll write a book in 2037, get them off my back. And because everybody wanted me to write a story, or the story of JLF, or the story of whatever. And I said, yes, I will, but this is not the time to do it. That's going to be a political book, and I'm not ready to write it yet. And then she kept saying, no, but everybody wants you to write something, so, you write something. So then I said, why don't I write about my family's experiences and my experiences that we've encountered with the supernatural. Aruna is here. We used to play lots of dark room in Molikbadi and Guptubadi, etc. So, all our ancestral homes used to have things that go bump in the night. So it was fairly easy to convert some of this into a memoir, which is what they seem to have been a demand for, and that's how the book came about.
Thank you, all three of you, and also that sort of...
Hi Rick, hi Sunandani.
To go forward into the genre of ghost stories, I think all of us would agree that the setting, the atmosphere, how one sets the scenography for where the story is going to take place is a very important ingredient. And across all these three books, there are so many settings, so many atmospheres. If we wanted to go through each of them, we would need about 4 or 5 more sessions. Because it goes, of course, from India, it goes to, there's a story set in China, there's Daisy's book, which is between Massachusetts and 2 or 3 places in India, various regions. And also, taking from what Daisy and Sanjoy were saying, this, what you were saying, Daisy, about being brought up to believe in ghosts, and Sanjoy, your automatic, from your young days, your the understanding that you had, that you have this capacity to receive messages, as you keep saying in the book. And that there are many characters in the book who there is this constant balancing and debate between who you could call a skeptic and who you could call a believer, and that also then becomes another thread through each of your writing. But I would like each of you to talk a little bit about how you set up atmospheres. Again, I will start with you, Sanjoy, because with you it's not so much about setting up an atmosphere, about remembering atmospheres that you have actually encountered, which is from, India to Switzerland. So we'll start with you and go in the opposite direction.
So, in my case, it wasn't so much me looking for a setting as much as the setting has found a perfect space and a ghost has popped up. What's interesting is that not all the ghosts popped up in the most obvious places. So I never saw a ghost, say, in the Valley of the Kings or the Valley of the Queens or Egypt or Turkey. But I did see ghosts in a vacant place, piece of land in Goa, of course in our homes in Safdarjung. My first sighting in Guptubadi here in my Mamar Badi when I was at the age of 5, which really stayed with me. But also going back to your last question, when one is young and you see these other things, you don't necessarily think that you're seeing a ghost. It's an incident and it happens and you get terrified and you jump out of your skin. And you do jump out of your skin. In my case, I jumped out of my skin, my clothes, I shouted, screamed. And each time it happens, I still certainly get scared. But at the same time, I'm still a skeptic. I'm not necessarily a great believer in things that go bump in the night. But the settings, one assumes that it needs to be thunder and lightning and a dark, misty day. In this case, there have been ghosts in Khajuraho, for example. The ghost arrived. We're sitting in our suite, and I'm having a meeting with my colleagues. Punita's sleeping. Punita, my wife, is on the bed in front of me, and the whole, she sort of rises and, sort of convulses, and the sheet rises and convulses, and we all jump up and go and then all of the grandmother's tales, never wake a person up in the middle of something like this. So you wait for the person to subside. And then when it happens again, so a lot of these things have happened in sort of daylighty, normal kind of places, not necessarily in a spooky setting. But what I've tried to do is give you an understanding of where one is. The most obvious one is actually Jerusalem, where in the valley or Jahannam, which is, Valley of Hell or where hell derives its name from, overlooking the old city when, the second incident of possession happened. That again, because of the kind of setting of where it is, you actually get doubly frightened. Because here you know that you're up deep shit because you're in the valley of hell. But surprisingly, that particular, being, whoever wanted to do possession kind of stuff, was actually a nice guy. So it was okay. It worked out okay. But not every time does it work out okay. It's, two of the times there were sweet ghosts, but the rest of it, they were baddies.
Well, unlike Sanjay and Daisy, I wasn't really brought up to believe in ghosts. I've had no experience with the supernatural whatsoever, never. Of course, I've heard people say that, they've seen a ghost or somebody they know have seen a ghost, etc. And of course, as a child, one is terribly afraid. I used to be terrified of death, because it was just the fact that I didn't know what came after. So if anybody in the neighborhood died, I remember that I used to, just I would run past the house. I was so afraid that something would happen. But actually, what I agree with Sanjay, that a setting for a ghost story need not be a ghostly setting. Like it need not be a broken down mansion or a graveyard or a burning heart.
Or a prison.
Or a prison. Or any such spooky place. It could be any place. It could be a room in my house. It could be my house. It could be your house. It could be a hotel. It could be a restaurant. It could be anywhere. And the way I prefer to write my stories or to think of my stories is even the atmosphere that you were speaking about. I don't ever begin with an eerie atmosphere. I don't begin with the eerie, because I've often found that when people do that, then, it just becomes, it's horror on horror, blood on blood, violence on violence, and all sorts of things. So that at some point in the story, you sort of get saturated and you're not afraid of it anymore. You don't feel scared anymore. So the way I look at atmosphere is that it should begin in a story. I mean, and that's the way I've written my stories. It should begin in a very ordinary way. It should begin like any other story, any story of human relationships, a mother-daughter, father and son, friends, rivals, etc. So it could begin on a very sort of ordinary note, so that the reader is tricked into believing that this is just an ordinary story. There's really nothing to get, there's nothing spooky about it. And then gradually you drop hints. Somewhere there's a veiled hint that the story isn't really an ordinary story. It is moving in another direction. Then a second hint comes, and a stronger hint comes. And the final terror has to burst out right towards the end. That's why I feel that the last line of a ghost story is very important, and that stays with you. That's the way I write my stories, and that's the way I like reading ghost. I mean, that's the kind of ghost story I like reading.
Yes, so when I said that I was brought up to believe in ghosts, I have a particular memory where I was about 3 and I was lying in bed about to go to sleep, and I told my mother I was afraid of ghosts. And my grandmother, who had later appeared in The Riding Habit, had just died an unpleasant death, so I think that was contributing to it. And my mother said, well, you don't need to be afraid of ghosts, because there's something they want, and you have to just say to them, how can I help you? And then you just help them take care of their problem, and then they'll go away. And so I think she thought that would make me feel better, but actually I slept with the lights on for years after that, because she didn't say there's no such thing, or she said, yeah, they'll probably show up and they have business to finish and you just have to help them out. So I was always terrified at that time, but I think the ghost that I created in this novel is this very prosaic ghost. He's like a businessman. He's a grandfather. He's a businessman. And he's concerned about the allocation of annuities, I'm giving a spoiler, in his will and how that's going to play out after his wife dies. So he has business, actual business that's unfinished. And he's, you know, he's kind of stodgy and maybe even a bit homophobic. So he shows up when he's an opportunist, and he just shows up whenever somebody, like he has to be in his chair, like that's where he has to appear. So he just shows up when he thinks somebody's going to come into his old study, or later he reappears in another setting, but it's in the middle of the day, and he's kind of like a little bit like a hologram, and he's just, you know, like very talking about the files and, you know, what's going to get done. So I sort of went out of my way to, I guess, make him very unscary. And in fact, the really scary ghosts in the book are the people who are not yet dead, right? So sometimes we are actually haunted by the living there. You know, I'm sure many people have had the experience of a family member or a friend who's sort of hollowed out in some way, and they feel like they're haunting your life or someone else's life. And so there's actually, Alice's mother is much scarier than the ghost, and she's very much alive.
Yeah, that's an interesting point to draw out again. Who's the scarier, whether the living or the dead are scarier, of course. But also, from what you were saying, of course, the ghost in your novel appears in bright daylight, appears in places which actually could give us comfort, a sunny mountainside, or, you know, a library, which is a cozy, you know, looked at as a cozy space. And even in your stories, there will be, you know, if I look at Madame Wu and her setting, it's a home. It's a very homely kind of feel, and then something begins to emerge, which, as you said, with little hints dropped, and then you have this entire story that conjures up a much darker history. And of course, Daisy, in your book, it spans 3 generations, and it is about the 3rd generation discovering things through this first generation who decides to visit her. But taking forward this idea of visitation, Sanjoy, you mentioned something about possession, and there is, Aruna, in your book also, there are a couple of stories where that is dealt with. One set in Kolkata in a period that many of us have read about and are proud of, but I won't mention it. And Daisy, also, as you're saying in your book, there's no possession as such, but this thing of who is haunting. When you've met the ghost, that ghost has been dealt with, but there is still some, when the book actually gets more eerie, is when the ghost is actually out of the picture. So then what is that sinister thing that is left in the air, which is not about the ghost at all? So if we can just talk about this idea of possession a little bit.
Well, in this case, you know, it's 2 different incidents, but the more scary one was we had gone on an off-site to Rishikesh and on whitewater rafting. I fell off the raft at one point of time. There was a dead body floating right next to me, and we sort of bobbed along for a while. And I kept getting this sense of a very dark sort of energy. And I'm a fairly, like all my mamas and my cousins will tell you, I'm a fairly happy type of person. But in this case, that feeling of something else sort of taking over was very strong. And I didn't know how to deal with it. And, you know, this sort of carried on through the night. In the morning, we get onto the bus, so we have 2 busloads of people going back to Delhi. And now, I mean, the telling of this story is really not my account, because I didn't remember any of it. This is actually just a compilation of what everybody said to me, except that when Punita, my wife, read it, she said it was only 10% as frightening as it was when it actually happened. So what basically happened is, there were 5 people trying to hold me down as we headed back to Delhi. I kept flying off the bus seat. The bus driver was beyond terrified and said, bhoot, bhoot chad gaya kind of stuff. The only thing I remember before completely losing memory of it was this thing that kept saying, I'm coming for you. And it's something that, I mean, they stopped off at Haridwar to get me sedative shots in the hospital. That too didn't stop this energy from getting me to bounce off the seat through the 6-hour journey. And of course, by the time I got to Delhi, we went to the hospital and all of that continued. But how it stopped was, and this continued for about 10 days, this very, very heavy sense of, not being myself, but somebody else, taking. And then I remember I was like, this is so boring. I mean, who is this, whatever it was? And, get the, out of my being. And literally, I had to articulate it in so many words and be fairly aggressive about it. And next morning I was fine and I was in office. So it was a 10-day incident. The other one was more scary, but there was no consequences to the taking over of my body. I just felt this energy, completely, I mean, the entire energy pushing down on me, sort of like a heart attack, except I wasn't sweating and my BP wasn't high. But, it's only when I finally, out of desperation, had to just give in to the energy subsuming my body, was I able to then jump out of bed, put the lights on, call Punita, say this has happened, check what's happened. I'd just been to the Church of the Sepulchre, so the priest had given me some holy water, had given me a rosary, had given me a photograph of Mother Mary and the baby Christ, which I then took out. I sprinkled my bed with holy water. I put the rosary under my pillow, and all seemed to be well. But it was a bizarre thing, and it's quite terrifying. When the second time it happened, my terror was, I hope it's not what happened the first time. So whatever it is, you can say it's a breakdown, you can say whatever, but the experience was so totally bizarre that, there was little explanation.
I think it's actually the fact that we're not able to adequately, rationally explain the experiences that makes it, that's where the fear lies, right? If you were able to rationally explain it, then. Aruna, just to extend that question of possession, I'd also want you to talk about the variety of beings you introduce us to in the book, because it's 13 short stories and each one is a very, very different kind of more than human or supernatural, whatever you want to call it, encounter.
Well, I'm certainly not going to tell the story of Possessed.
Please do not.
Because I want everyone to read it. And unlike Sanjoy, I have had no experience of being possessed, though I have seen people behaving very peculiarly at times, like, and then suddenly coming back to their own normal selves. I have seen that with friends sometimes, and also with an uncle of mine. I don't know if they were possessed, by a ghost or anything, but I have seen things like that. And coming to the next part of your question, see, for me, as I said, since I've never really experienced the supernatural, my stories are all fictional. They're all imagined stories. And imagined in the sense that, it's something or the other triggers it off. Maybe a face I had seen in childhood, or something I'd heard, which I was not supposed to have overheard, and which I didn't even understand. But then, as an adult, I understood. And, or a story I may have read, something I may have read ages ago, I've forgotten the context, I've forgotten everything. But one particular phrase or line just stays in your mind. And that is how my stories were triggered. And frankly, I never structure a story from beginning to end, that this is the way I'm going to, not like building a house. I begin with a certain point, and it more or less writes itself, like ideas come, and that's the way. So I've used various different kinds of the supernatural. For instance, there's black magic in one story, there's possession in another story, there's this, even the, flora and fauna can be hurt and can take revenge. That's there in one story. And so on, and there are actual ghosts, and there's a story called Grandmother's Bundle, in which there are actual ghosts and pitnis and shakchunnis. These are these typical beings which we are told about.
Bangali ghosts.
Bangali Bhoot, Bangali Bhoot. But Bangali Bhoot though is not only in, Petni and all this, Petni and Shakchuni and all that. The Mamdo Bhoot is supposed to be a Muslim male. Brahmodatti is supposed to be a Brahmin.
We are both castists and sort
know,
of divided on
know,
religious lines when it comes to ghosts.
We give them identities. We give them religions, We give them, I mean, Bengalis have this tremendous knack of, humanizing everything around them and also appropriating them.
And also, especially in that particular story, which I will not name, but you are referring to, giving these beings a generous dollop of humor.
Yeah.
That's also, I think, quite a Bengali trait.
Yes. And so this is the way, there are lots of stories. There are different kinds of stories. And there's a story of, there's reincarnation. There's also, what else? There's, there are actual ghosts, actually people who have died and are kind of revenging themselves on human beings, even though the human beings per se, those particular people have not harmed them. But it's a kind of, like, now I have the power, I'll take my revenge on humanity.
It's what Daisy was saying about unfinished business.
Human beings who have, human beings as a unit, as a people who have harmed me. So there are these different kinds of stories in my book.
I'm glad Penguin asked you to do a 13 because now it's really a nice bouquet of ghost stories. Daisy, over to you.
Yeah, so I think when we talk about possession, I think I like to think about the work that the psychoanalyst Sudhir Kakar did about how some kinds of phenomena are explained as mental illness in some places and as possession in other places. And I think it's more interesting to simply describe what happens. And so, like, the character that I said, that's the living character who is haunting, is in a way possessed, whether it's with mental illness or with the spirits of her family and the unfinished business of her family. She behaves like she's possessed, and she behaves sort of like a poltergeist. You go into rooms and she's destroyed them, or she's an alcoholic, so you'll find empty bottles rolling around where she was, and she'll sort of go around the house pounding on the doors. And so even though I don't necessarily say that she's possessed, that's a possible explanation too, that we don't know. Like with mental illness, there's so much we don't understand, and most of the explanations don't actually satisfy a lot of people or hold water, and the medicines don't help and things like that. And in fact, an American editor looked at the book and she said she thought it was that there was a very insensitive sentence in my book where because Alice's fiance, Ronit, is the skeptic in the book, and he's a psychiatrist. And at one point, somebody says, well, we have to get your mother treatment. And then Ronit thinks to himself, well, I don't really think there's any hope here. And so she thought that was really insensitive to mental illness. And but I didn't think so, because I think there are sometimes when mental illness is like just a failure of an explanation for why something is happening.
And I think, just being conscious of time, I'd like to move on to just asking each of you to read a little bit, and then we can open it up to questions. But taking from what you were saying, Daisy, about the possession, there's and to segue into the reading, there's a chapter towards the end of the book where Alice goes and meets a friend of her grandmother's, and when she leaves, there's this actually beautiful description of, beautiful sentence, I can't remember exactly, but where there's a moment that they share, and they they're separating from each other, but they are both aware of this one woman that they're both missing. That's it. So with that, maybe we could start the reading with you.
Okay. So since I didn't know I was going to be doing a reading or be on this panel, I didn't prepare anything, but luckily my wonderful moderator gave me an idea of what to read and supplied me with the book because I didn't have it with me. So I'm going to read just two little tiny segments from when Alice and Ronald have gone to Missouri because she's trying to figure out, in search of information about her grandfather, whose ghost she's seen. And she's led to believe that she needs to go to Missouri. But as they walk up the mountainside, like towards Landower Bazaar, that's where I learned Hindi, up in Landower, so I know it very well. She's feeling very sick because she ate some bahar ka khana that, as we all know, you shouldn't do. I didn't say that in the book, but that's what happened. And so they've gone down a little path to a house, and he says he'll go find somebody. And so he leaves her behind. So Ronit strode quickly towards the side of the house that faced the slope of the mountain. The bungalow was curiously shaped, probably due to its precarious perch on a terraced bit of mountainside. He walked around a jutting addition, which looked like a sunroom of some kind, and presently came upon an entryway. There he knocked and even called out, but to no avail. He tried the door. It was unlocked. Gingerly, he pulled it open, called out again, and stepped inside. Just then he heard a woman scream, a long, piercing scream. It seemed to come from the front of the house. He turned and ran back around the sunroom, worried that it might have been Alice, but Alice was not where he had left her. Nervously, he walked around the side of the house to the front. There, on a small, well-tended, rectangular bit of lawn, lay Alice, a heap of crumpled lavender, bending over her, gazing with great curiosity, were three women. And then so now I'm going to skip a little part where they call a doctor and so on. And then they invite him to sit down for tea, these three women. Do you usually take just 1 spoon of sugar? Asked his hostess politely. I always have 2, and the girls generally have 3. Minnie likes 4, corrected Lulu. That's true, the hostess conceded, but we've asked her to consider 3. Minnie betrayed no reaction to this conversation and continued to stare at Ronit impassively. I'm sorry, Ronit began. I've been very rude. I should have introduced myself. Poor Alice was so ill, we've all been distracted, said his hostess, smiling encouragingly. But how did you know her name? Asked Ronit, confused. Well, you did call out to her, she said, then paused. But of course we have been expecting her. We just didn't know that you would be with her.
Aruna.
It's hard to do both. Yes.
So actually this story begins with a young couple who the husband is a botanist, and the woman, she's very fond of, they've moved into a new house, they have a lovely garden, which the husband has really, planned and planted with great care. It's a beautiful garden. And then at some point, the Mali finds a little mulberry, a sprig, a mulberry, a plant, a seedling, in fact. And he plants it in the garden. And she's happy about it. She loves trees. But when the husband comes home, he's very annoyed. He's on a deputation somewhere. When he comes back, he's very annoyed because this tree will grow, very large, and it'll spoil his garden. And which is actually what happened. When the tree started fruiting, droves of monkeys, different kinds of birds, peacocks, they all came and they made a real mess of the whole place, jumping from branch to branch, cramming the fruit, the mulberries, then bird droppings and other droppings and half-eaten fruit droppings. So what this guy does, he was a botanist. He knew that he couldn't chop off the tree. So he went and he bought some poison and injected it into the tree. And the tree gradually crumpled, withered, and died. So, and then when that happened, his wife is very upset. She doesn't, and she kind of withdraws from him. And there is this marital dissonance kind of thing going on. And he then finally he takes her to a forest lodge in Bankura, where he thinks she loves trees, she'll love, she'll like it, she'll forget about the old mulberry tree. And so the first evening he goes for a stroll. There's a river in the forest, and maybe just a few hundred yards away from the lodge. So he goes and he sits there, and at the river, he kind of loses a sense of time. He's so relaxed, he's so happy, he loses sense of time. And then, this is what happens. He gets up and starts walking home. He rose and strode rapidly in the direction from which he had come. He walked for quite some time before realizing that he was nowhere near his destination. Was the lodge so far from the river? He walked faster. Then he started running. And what had happened when the tree crumbled, fell, withered and fell, a lot of this wildlife also died. A couple of baby monkeys died. Some birds were crushed under the branches. And and that was what upset the wife very much. So anyway, he walked for quite some time before realizing that he was nowhere near his destination. Was the lodge so far from the river? He walked faster. Then he started running, straining his eyes in the dark. But there was no sign of the lodge. He took another direction, another and another. A wave of panic swept through him. He realized he had lost his way. He was going round and round in circles. He stopped. Rather, he was made to stop by an enormous tree looming in front of him. Monkeys of all sizes were hanging from the branches, clinging to the trunk and peering from between the leaves. In his frenzied state, he thought he saw hundreds and thousands, whole families of them, from huge, hoary, red-bottomed patriarchs to wee babies with beady eyes suckling at their mothers' breasts. They sat impervious, as though stuck to the tree, and stared at him with unblinking eyes. Not a breath of wind blew, not a leaf stirred. The silence was palpable. He turned left and dashed into a tangle of briars. He turned right to find huge clumps of tussock towering high above his head. Out of nowhere, a flock of birds appeared. They flew above his head in slow circles. They sat on his head and shoulders, their hard claws piercing his skull and skin. Flapping his arms to wave them off, he turned around. His chest heaved, and he found himself sobbing like a child. And now an army of peacocks blocked the way. They came towards him, slowly, purposefully, their eyes glittering with malevolence. He was trapped. He felt the hot blood thudding in his ears. His heart beat against his chest, hard as hammer on anvil. It contorted with pain, excruciating pain, in spasm after spasm, as though wrenched with red-hot pincers. Reeling in agony, he turned around. And again the tree stood in the way, vast, dark, unmoving, inexorable. Something odd was happening, something for which there was no rational explanation. And now he did something he had never done after he became an adult and a scientist. He closed his eyes and tried to pray. He had been a sensitive child, easily afraid. Whenever he heard funeral processions passing through the streets, accompanied by cries of Bolohori, Hori Bol, he would rush to his mother, sobbing and shivering. "Don't be afraid of death, Khuka," she would say, and clasp him in her arms, pressing his head against her breast and comforting him with the words, "It will come to all of us when God sends for us. Death, danger, sorrow and pain are part of life. But Ram lives within us. Take Ram's name whenever you face any of these, and your fears will melt away."
Arunadi,
Shruti Ranjan closed his eyes.
I would like to stop you there because I think the next section will give away the story. Because I really think I would like to stop it on the cliffhanger because I've read it and I would like all of you to read it as well.
I forgot what.
Sanjoy.
I was asking him what bit should I read. So should I read Cal bits? Should I read Khajuraho, Punita bits? Which one?
I have
Anybody?
recommended Khajuraho for Calcutta.
Khajuraho over Calcutta? Okay. So this is the Khajuraho story I was telling you about. We're commemorating 1,000 years of the Khajuraho temples being built, which was at the same time as the turn of the millennium. The Khajuraho last group of temples were completed in 999 Common Era. So in 1999, we were doing this big thing with the President of India coming in the Khajuraho area on the Shivkund, because I said we must do something with water and pay obeisance to Shivji, etc. So our production crew, including Sharupa, Manika, Dipali, Deepika, Vandana, Yamini, and Dilip, were sitting in a circle at the foot of the bed, some leaning against it or propped up on bolsters, while others were seated on chairs. From where I was sitting, I could see Punita asleep on the bed. Suddenly, the sheet that she had covered herself with appeared to levitate, with her body convulsing from head to toe. I scrambled up and dashed to her, calling out her name and trying to wake her up, but to no avail. Her body and the sheet undulated like windswept waves in a lake till the convulsions subsided. She woke up, oblivious to what had happened, and was perturbed to see us peering down at her with a collective look of horror on our faces. We recounted the incident to her and asked her what she had experienced. She said she hadn't felt anything at all and was totally unaware of what had transpired. I held on to Punita, seeking comfort and reassurance that all was well, while the others, completely spooked, fled from the suite and headed to their own rooms. The commemoration was magnificent, and the visit of President K.R. Narayanan was a success. The program garnered a great deal of attention for Khajuraho and briefly contributed to its economy. On our return to Delhi, still puzzled as to what exactly had occurred that night, we went to the Karmic Research Center and consulted Gurudev, our ascended master. Gurudev was ever calm and had a deep understanding of the most complex situations. He suggested that Punita undertake a past life regression session, and through a guided meditation, he took her back many lifetimes to 1,000 years ago to Khajuraho, where she had apparently been a tantric priestess. I was a powerful tantric head priest who had misused my position and powers for self-aggrandizement and, filled with greed and ego, had sought sexual fulfillment. Punita was a priestess with siddhis or powers bestowed upon her through tapasya, practicing extreme self-discipline, meditation, and penance to purify the mind, body, and soul in order to achieve spiritual growth and self-realization. She had come to Khajuraho to challenge me, but it seemed she was unsuccessful, and my powers and spells had pulled her over the brink into insanity. The regression got more complicated as friends from this lifetime were also present then, playing key roles as aides, procurers, and deputies to the head tantric. And they were all impacted by the tragedy that unfolded against the backdrop of Khajuraho. 1,000 years later, it appears we had all chosen to be reborn together in this present lifetime to work through our entangled karma and find ways to forgive and heal. We still don't quite know what happened that night and what possessed Punita, but the image of her undulating body has stayed vividly in my mind.
We have time just for 2 quick questions. There's one here. Yeah, and just keep the questions short, please.
Sure. Thank you very much for this fantastic session. Undoubtedly, it is very attractive to listen the stories of these fantastic writers. I have a question I want to ask you ardently, okay? When I'm talking regarding supernatural ghost story is one of the part of the supernatural. Supernatural is very broader context, okay? It is not important the person need to be a ghost. Basically, he lived in this earth a few years ago, okay? the person can get possessed by some forces which is not been in this earth at all. Okay. So my question, have you ever considered the greater spectrum of supernatural at all? Thank you very much.
Who would like to take that?
I mean, if you read my book, you'll see the whole spectrum. It's not just about ghosts that go pop in the night. It's about energies. It's about the fact that the more recent research that's just come out of CERN 3 weeks ago says that the God particle or the neutron, which continues to exist beyond our bodily form and is connected to the neutrons which form space and energy and dark matter, and the possibility or the impossibility earlier of us predicting the future, traveling into the future, today is a possibility that science is seeing because of the way that our neutrons are connected to the world's neutrons. So yes, there's a spectrum of all of this, so do pick up the book and have a read.
Daisy, Arunadi, any response? Okay, one more question. Yeah.
Just like religion, do you think, any of you can answer, ghosts are also universal? Because, you know, like in every part, every culture, you know, the theme of ghosts are practically existing. But there are certain cultures where it is more prevalent. You were possessed in the hills, and there was a constable of mine, I was in police earlier, who said, sir, हमारे वहाँ आप जाएंगे तो हमारे वहाँ तो सब आम बात है, मतलब कि लोगों को ऐसे ही बीच बीच में वो पकड़ लेते हैं, आप लोग जाने से आपको दिखाई नहीं पड़ेगा. And Jim Corbett, who I you know, like read repeatedly, he absolutely believed in the spirits. In fact, there are instances.
He got thrown out of his house at night.
Absolutely, yeah. Absolutely.
Anyone?
Oh, there's a third question at the back.
One last question there, and then we will, sorry. we really need to make time for the next panel, sorry.
This is to Arunadi. You began by saying, I'm Joydeep, you began by saying that you never really were brought into or brought up with believing in ghosts. And yet, your imagination is so wild that you write stories about them. Now that you've written so much about ghosts, do you now believe in ghosts?
Not really. What I can say is that I don't believe and I don't disbelieve. You know, I mean, I haven't experienced them, so I can't say that I believe in them. But I certainly have experienced some kind of supernatural oddity or aberration, you could put it like that, at different times of my life. And so I'm not unwilling to agree with Sanjoy and Daisy that there may be some such powers in the universe. I think, you know, some people are mediumistic. They are able to they're able to reach out to these powers, or these powers can reach out to them. I probably am a very, very Jakibole Berushik, you know, individual, and so I really can neither reach out to them nor they to me. As I said, I love reading ghost stories. I loved reading Sanjoy's book, but I can't say that I believe in everything that Sanjoy has said. And Sanjoy, yourself, you said that I'm a skeptic still. I don't know what happened. Things happened, but I can't be absolutely sure that they happened. So it's something like that with me.
I think that's a great note to end on, that the big question is still there. Are there ghosts or are there not? Is the supernatural there or not? As we continue to navigate this world that is not just human, but full of many other energies that we will probably never fully understand, which may be a very good thing. And I'd like to say before we end that all three authors will be at the signing. So please do pick up the books, get them signed, and if you have any other questions.
I'm actually in the next panel, so I'll be signing after the next panel. Yes.
Okay. So good, there won't be too much of a crowd. There'll just be two, and then Daisy after the next panel. Thank you so much. Thank you to all three panelists.
Thank you, Vikram. Thank you so much. And I just wanted everybody to join me in wishing my Topu Mama his 80th birthday. Happy birthday. And thank you for coming.
Thank you so much.